May the most precious blood that pours out from the sacred head of our Lord Jesus Christ, the temple of divine wisdom, tabernacle of divine knowledge, and sunshine of heaven and earth, cover us now and forever. Amen. This is the prayer composed by Precious Blood Apostolate, USA. Dear parents, brothers and sisters, our little children, may I start with a simple story of vocation said by a Catholic pastor about a little boy in his parish who received his call to become a priest years ago. On Corpus Christi, on this feast day, priests carried the Blessed Sacrament through the streets, accompanied by worshipping throngs, densely packed crowd. Priest says in his own words, "In my parish, too, we used to carry the Blessed Sacrament and stop at every family or appointed houses where altars were set or arranged. It is so happened that I missed one house, and the 10-year-old boy in that particular house was a great believer of presence of God in the Blessed Sacrament. He used to visit Blessed Sacrament with his mother. He wanted to know from his mother why Jesus did not stop at their home. Asked the priest, his mother replied, "Yes, he did ask me, and I went back to that house with the Blessed Sacrament. Yes, I heard the shouting of that boy, 'Jesus came to my house.' And he said proudly, 'I think I will work for him.' And he did. He became a priest and served the community. During this pandemic, priests all over the world continued celebrating Mass privately, and many became TV stars, and they never stopped, and I am sure we will not stop to celebrate Eucharist every day and every time. Holy Eucharist is the greatest treasure that the Church has on earth. It is Christ himself, says Cardinal Francis Arinze. Therefore, my dear friends, I like to wish you all a happy feast of Corpus Christi, precious blood and body of Christ. Before I go to the celebration proper, may I bring 3 major concepts or situations that will question the presence of Christ today in the Eucharist, not only the presence of Christ in the Eucharist, but also the presence of God in the world and his mighty and powerful and healing presence. These situations also can make us to turn to God and strengthen our faith and be encouraged to live the life that we have. The first concept or situation, it is taken from the article titled "Counties Where American Dream is Dead." You might have read. The American dream is the ideal through equality of opportunity. Any person who works hard can achieve upward economic mobility. That is sure. Anyone who works hard. While millions of Americans believe the American dream still alive, the experience of millions of others today tell very different story, especially in many counties, almost 3,000 counties. Conceptually, the American dream is based on the assumption that given equal opportunity, victory depends on one's choice. However, broader conditions related to the community and environment, particularly during one's childhood, can severely hinder the equality of opportunity and any chance of achieving American dream. Please hold on to it. I will come back to the message. The second concept or situation, 2 weeks before, we had the storms, thunder, and heavy lightnings. At that time, my dear friends, I was just thinking of the storms in our life, the struggles that we are bearing with, especially during this time of pandemic. Consequently, I viewed many motivational and inspirational videos, and one titled, "Trust in God in the Storm." I think it is given by Dr. Charles Stanley, pastor of a Baptist church at Atlanta. He says, "Many of you are going through storms. Maybe a storm on your job, storm in your marriage, storm with your kids, storm with your parents, storm with your physical being, storm with your finances, storms that we don't invite, storms that come from the people we think that they love us." So many questions can be asked today. What do you do when everything you trusted on collapses in a storm? How do you prepare for a sudden change in your life? How do you recover when life hits you on the blind side? What do you do after a time of hard work, commitment, and loyalty? Still life fails, family separates. It is hard to maintain hope. And the third concept, third situation is you all know and we experience. Many medias, news channels, and political leaders, even the religious, charismatic leaders used this particular time of pandemic, time of struggle and pandemic, to frighten the faithful by speaking about the future destruction of the humanity, destruction of the church, destruction of the people, destruction of the religions, religious institutions, etc. My dear friends, fear, frustration, and confusion, and misunderstanding where it is really these fear, frustration, confusion, and misunderstanding are really creeping in the hearts and minds of the young people, and many commit suicide. And even in the mind and heart of the old people, they ask this same question: will there be anything left for us in the future? Why do we live? After all, what is life? Life is full of circumstances and uncertainties. Informed to you all these three situations that exist in our life, there are other facts and concepts, but I take these three concepts. When there is no dream, when we face storms in our life, when we have the fear in our hearts, we can turn to God in trust. The pastor, Dr. Charles, says, God uses storms to shape us, mold us. God uses them to teach us trust and perseverance. To say further, on March 27, 2020, our beloved Pope blessed us with his apostolic blessing, Urbi et Orbi, and healed the fearful hearts of the faithful. And he gave us encouragement through the papal address basing on the Gospel of Mark chapter 4, 35 to 41. Jesus calms the storms. May I repeat the positive sentences of healing and strengthening. I hope this will be the proper translation. Like the disciples, we will experience that with Jesus on board, there will be no shipwreck, because this is God's strength, turning to God everything that happens to us, the good and even the bad things. He brings serenity into our storms, because with God, life never dies. And to say a little more further, many priests took the Blessed Sacrament and walked through the streets of their parishes to remove coronavirus and bring healing and comfort to the faithful. There are more information. There are incidents where priests go over the cities and villages in a helicopter with the Blessed Sacrament. And in many churches, they never stop the holy adoration of the Eucharist. And over here, my dear friends, even our place, I could see people never stopped coming over to the church and praying before the church in the parking lots. The family was lighting the candles and praying together. And I'm sure the churches were closed. All over the world, the churches were closed. But the families became the domestic churches. Of course, they are the domestic churches, and were opened as they viewed and participated Mass and adoration, as they prayed Rosary, Divine Mercy, prayed Psalms of Protection, 91, 120, 21, etc. And there was a cartoon showed the grandma is viewing or attending Mass online, sitting on her chair, and the grandson is with a collection basket. So you can see, if grandma is watching, you can go and collect money from her. So that is the collection. But my dear friends, even yesterday in the news, many people lost opinion over many things. They lost the sense of sympathy because of the recent developments, the destructions that are happening all around in the counties and in our world. Even yesterday, there was many of the African countries were opened. So some of the leaders were telling and proclaiming that in God we trust, and they opened the country. And this is the feast that was instituted in order to give God collective thanks for Christ's abiding presence in the Eucharist. In the first reading from the Deuteronomy chapter 8, the verse 3, He therefore let you be afflicted with the hunger, and then fed you with manna, a food unknown to your ancestors, so you might know that it is not by bread alone, but people live, but by all that comes forth from the mouth of God. The first reading, especially mentioning of manna, is meant to introduce us to the main focus of today's feast, how since the time of Jesus, God sustains his faithful followers with the flesh and the blood of his Son, Jesus, the living bread. John chapter 6, verse 51. Thus we will become Spirit-filled. We will become Spirit-filled as we receive the body and the blood of Christ. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 17. We are united with him. We, though many, are one body, for all we partake thus one loaf. As Eucharistic meal unites us every day, every precious meal in your families, my dear friends. Every meal that we take together in the family will unite. That is why last year I think I promoted my idea of having at least one meal, all of you together, all the families together, or my family members, whoever there are, together, and sustain your love and care for one another. But now most of us have spiritual communion rather than receiving Jesus physically in Eucharist, a sacramental communion. Little more. I hope you do not get tired. St. Thomas Aquinas says, defined spiritual communion as ardent desire to receive Jesus in the most holy sacrament and in lovingly embracing him. And from the book Seven Secrets of the Eucharist by Binnie Flynn, as he relies on the teaching of St. Thomas Aquinas, he says there are both sacramental and spiritual communions. Sacramental communion refers to the physical reception of the body and the blood or the Eucharist, and spiritual communion involves real longing for union with Christ. I don't have much time to say, but you can also refer St. Catherine of Siena and her vision and the two chalices where Jesus holds in front of her. St. Teresa of Jesus wrote The Way of Perfection, chapter 35, when you do not receive communion and you do not attend Mass, you can make spiritual communion, which is most beneficial practiced by it. The love of God will be greatly impressed on you. And 2003, Pope St. John Paul II wrote in his encyclical Ecclesia de Eucharistia, the Eucharistic Church, it is good to cultivate in our hearts a constant desire for the sacrament of Eucharist. Thus was the origin of our practice of spiritual communion even in the first century. We all had this prayer, and I'm sure all of you were praying this spiritual prayer, spiritual communion prayer, which was composed by Saint Alphonsus of Liguori in 18th century. And may I conclude with this prayer. Join with me silently, though we will pray after the communion whenever we have opportunity. My Jesus, I believe that you are present in the most blessed sacrament. I love you above all things, and I desire to receive you into my soul. Since I cannot receive sacramentally, come at least spiritually into my heart. I embrace you as you were already there, and unite myself wholly to you. Never permit me to be separated from you. The prayer itself gives us the real meaning of the spirituality of the spiritual communion, and also the spirituality of deeper understanding of our precious blood and precious body. May God bless all of you. Happy feast to all of you. Amen. Let us all stand for the profession of our faith.